Hello, my friends. This is Aleen Wilson, returning from the shingles. I hope you older friends have been better at vaccinating than I have been. But I want to give you a little bit of insight into how these vaccines came about. And much of this I can credit to Margot Smith with the PhD in public health from an article printed in 2019 in a newspaper. Medical science has profoundly changed our lives. I'm sure that I would not have survived to this old age without antibiotics' advantage in epidemiology and surgery. I was a child in the 1930s. We lived in a little house on the road that led to my grandfather's sawmill. There were only 4 houses on the road. There were friends in the neighborhood. And this was the time when the parents said, go on out and play. They didn't tell you to stay in the fence or not to talk to strangers. It was just go out and play. So we did. The games were simple. Hopscotch, kick the can, tag, a lot of hide and go seek. And on a rainy day, we sat on Ann's front porch and played Monopoly. We were supposed to go home before twilight because that was the signal that it was going to turn dark. This was a time when the milkman, the bakery truck, the iceman delivered to our doors, and our neighborhoods were safe. But my parents were fearful of epidemics. I had classmates that suffered from scarlet fever, mumps, measles, German measles, chicken pox, mumps, whooping cough. I had rubella and had to stay in bed several days in a darkened room. They thought light bad for sick children's eyes. A lot of these diseases required quarantining, and that meant kids missed a lot of school. That wasn't the only bad thing. Cousin came to visit with her new boyfriend and was going to stay the weekend. Well, we had juggled everything around for one night to accommodate them. But up in the day, I got sick. Well, none of the doctor's offices were open, so the family doctor, Dr. Lancaster, came to the house, checked me out, and said, I don't know what's wrong with her, but it could be German measles, whooping cough, something that's very contagious. So your guests are going to have to be quarantined with you until I can correctly diagnose Aleen. Not a fun idea. Small house, couple visiting that had to go to work on Monday. My parents both worked. Well, as luck would have it, Sunday morning I woke up with spots all over me. I don't even remember which kind of measles it was, but they let them go home, so we didn't have to be quarantined. As an adult, I knew lots of survivors of all these dread diseases. Men who couldn't father children because they had mumps as a child. A friend that had a bad limp because he had polio. People with bad chickenpox scars, and these were a lot worse than acne. A friend that had a child that was retarded because she had German measles when she was pregnant. This was a big fear of the time. And they all experienced their illnesses before any vaccines were available. In order to understand diseases and vaccines, we need to go back and look at a little bit of history. In the 1930s, germ theory was less than 100 years old. Although people from biblical times knew that diseases were contagious, nobody knew how they spread. In 1854, there was a famous moment when John Snow stopped an epidemic of waterborne cholera in London by removing certain water pump handles. In the 1960s, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch found that diseases were caused by germs. This led to both a new world of medical exploration and to new fears of how epidemics originated. All have heard of Typhoid Mary, the infamous cook in the 1900 New York who was a typhoid carrier and infected her employers. She was finally quarantined and incarcerated. The well-known author, Helen Keller, was blind and deaf because of a fever as a child. She was taught to communicate through sign language and later speech by her teacher, Anne Sullivan. The movie, The Miracle Worker, was made in 1960, and it's about her life. People long knew that exposures to certain diseases made them immune. One could get certain illnesses only once, and this was known about smallpox, which killed about 30% of those catching it, and often left facial scars on survivors. In Asia, India, and Turkey, it was known that inoculation with a smallpox scab could lead to a mild disease, and would make you immune. In 1790s, Edward Jenner, a country doctor in England, noticed that the faces of milkmaids, the young women who milk cows, was rarely scarred by smallpox. He found that their exposure to cowpox and infections of cows protected them. This led to the development of cowpox vaccination as a smallpox prevention. And the word vaccine is derived from Latin that means smallpox of the cow. My childhood vaccination for smallpox left a scar on my upper arm. A rarity now. Although there's an internet site that used to show actresses with vaccination scars. Now that smallpox has been eradicated, smallpox vaccines no longer required. The last U.S. wild smallpox case occurred in 1949, And after extensive vaccination campaigns, the last case of smallpox in the world occurred in 1977. There are now vaccinations for common childhood diseases. Polio was a major fear when I was growing up. Public places were restricted for fear. The consequences of polio were quite serious. Children lost the ability to walk, to breathe, to use a limb. Hospitals had wards full of patients living out their lives in iron lungs. I remember seeing a newsreel at the movie. Everybody remember what newsreels were? This came before the feature at the movie. But I remember seeing a film of a ward filled with children in iron lungs. And it was a very large room, and there was a double row of kids in an iron lung. But that's the only thing that kept them alive. Former President Franklin Roosevelt was a victim of polio. He found relief from his symptoms with trips to Warm Springs, Arkansas. In 1955, Jonas Salk developed the first polio vaccine. The oral polio vaccine was developed by Albert Sabin and came into commercial use in 1961. In 1967, 68, as my children were growing up, I could give them their polio on a sugar cube and didn't have to worry about polio. In 1965, there were only 61 cases in the U.S., and by 1994, polio was declared eliminated from the Americas. In 2002, it was eliminated from Europe. Today, only Pakistan and Afghanistan continue to have polio cases. Diphtheria was another. I don't remember anybody that had diphtheria, but Mother did, and it was nothing for multiple children in one family to die of the disease. At the time before the vaccination, about 40% of the children that got diphtheria died from it. Measles were another real danger for us. In 1912, U.S. health care providers and laboratories were required to notify health departments of measles-related cases. In the first 10 years of reporting, there were about 6,000 measles-related deaths each year, and 48,000 were hospitalized. Complications from measles were difficulty breathing, ear infections, loss of hearing, seizures, hepatitis, eye infection, and neural and heart complications, and pneumonia, and may be fatal. Before 1963, when the vaccine became available for measles, nearly all children got measles by the time they were 15 years of age. I have a measles story after I read this. We feared measles, whooping cough, rubella, mumps, scarlet fever. They might be fatal, to make us very ill and keep us out of school for weeks. Some parents arranged to expose their children to measles and chickenpox. these diseases were far more dangerous in adults. Just by coincidence, last weekend I had a conversation with a friend that told of her parents suggesting an overnight party for all her friends because she had chickenpox. And that way, all the kids would be exposed and they'd get chickenpox as a child. And that's what they did. Now, preventing childhood diseases. The success of smallpox vaccination and the identification of specific germs led to a search for vaccines for other diseases. In my lifetime, these vaccines now protect my children and grandchildren from devastating diseases. 1923 diphtheria, 1924 tetanus, 1940 whooping cough, 1955 polio, 1963 measles, 1967 mumps, 1969 German measles or rubella, 1994 hepatitis B, 1995 chicken pox. We no longer fear epidemics and deaths from these childhood dangers because vaccination prevents them and we have antibiotics to treat them. Because so many people are vaccinated, these diseases no longer commonplace. Although not all children are vaccinated, these diseases are under control. Epidemiologists call this the herd effect. This is protection from infectious diseases that happen when most of the population is immune and protects those who are not immune. I, for one, am grateful that these deadly illnesses are no longer prevalent. I look forward to further miracles in the future for my children and grandchildren. Now, comment. The first shingles vaccine was somewhere around 2006, and then there was a better one that came along about 2017. Now, needless to say, I had heard of both of them and thought, I'll do it tomorrow. Well, tomorrow never came, and this is my second bat with the shingles. I think it would be wise of me, as soon as the rash is gone, to go get a vaccination. Thanks for letting me tell you this story. And in case you're wondering where I am, I'm at a parking pad outside my house, and this is a piece of Dahl de Veer that I made several years ago and have never had such a nice place to display it. Thank you for watching. Stay with me, folks.